Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy has received a lot of buzz on the internet over the past couple days, and I want to talk about whether it deserves the hype and whether it actually compares to the games that I've seen it be compared to, like Jedi Fallen Order. Let's start by talking about the mechanics, specifically the combat. If you don't know, you are limited to playing as Star-Lord, but the entire combat focuses on using your teammates as your abilities, and how you fight totally depends on who you have on your team at the time and what abilities for each character you have unlocked. Now this, for me, really makes me feel like the leader of a team. It really gives me the vibe of leading this ragtag group of misfits. It's awesome. And whenever a teammate is missing for whatever various reason that the story calls for, I feel significantly weaker than when I have my full team with me. So as your bond with your compatriots weakens, your total overall combat output also weakens, and those things align with the story in such a beautiful narrative way that it's so good. Now, is the combat as in-depth and as challenging as something like Jedi Fallen Order? In some ways, yes, and in a lot of ways, not really. It's not a game that I would necessarily replay on the hardest difficulty for the challenge of it and feel like confident that I would be able to utilize the mechanics, because there's just a lot more, in my opinion, and not necessarily a lot more in a way that I understand how to use them. There's a lot of just me pressing random buttons, but I'm sure that if I was better at the mechanics of the combat, that wouldn't be so much of a problem. So the answer is maybe I'm pretty stupid and probably wouldn't get there because I don't feel like it has the depth for me to want to get there. But if you do, that's awesome, and I don't blame you for that. That'd be really awesome for you. I'm very proud. Like your dad. Let's move on to the other biggest mechanic in this video game, the one that really drew me in, that's the choices mechanic. I think this is where a lot of the value of this game comes from. It makes replayability the most interesting thing. I think this game benefits a lot from its choice system. It makes replayability a thing. It makes the interest and the stress levels of having to be a team leader just that much higher. It's really great. I will say that some of the choices didn't have as big of an effect that I would have liked them to have, but I totally understand why. They had a narrative and they had story beats they wanted to hit, so you're kind of railroaded to hit them no matter what choices you make, and that's fine. It's understandable. It's how Telltale always did it. It's not something that we haven't seen before, and it does it in a unique way, in my opinion, because your choices do change how the characters act, and mostly it changes the dialogue, and a big part of this game is the dialogue. It's so incredibly well done. But if I'm being honest with you, there are maybe 3 really big decisions that I think impacted the overall game, and I think there's only the one ending, so it didn't really impact the ending. It did impact the game in another way that I don't want to get too much into without spoiling stuff for you, so definitely play it, and definitely tinker around with your choices and tell me what you think about that experience. Now let's talk about a mechanic that I often find myself talking about because it's very important to me, and that's traversal. And honestly, this game doesn't do anything too special with just how you move around the levels. It is mostly just walking and jumping, and sometimes walking in a direction that isn't the main way to go to explore. What actually makes moving around in this game interesting is the dialogue. The dialogue when you're walking around and your teammates are just chatting and shooting the shit, there's never a dull moment. They're always talking, and it's always interesting. You always are just filled with comedic moments, with interesting moments, with backstory moments. It's always something with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and it really makes them feel like real people. The flight ability in combat is kind of an interesting traversal mechanic, but really it's just kind of flashy and for show, and I didn't find it accomplish very much, but if you've had a different experience, I'd love to hear about that. And of course, I'd be remiss not to mention the Milano flight sequences, which there are a total of 3 of in the game. Honestly, it felt a little bit tacked on, a little bit gimmicky to me, but that didn't make them any less fun. It was super cool to just fly around in dogfights and shoot other planes. I wish there was a little bit more of it, and maybe that mechanic got a little more love and a little bit more fleshed out, but for what it was, I did enjoy it. And the final mechanic I'd like to touch on is the ability to unlock things as you play through the game, the progression. The main one, of course, being the standard experience system. As you fight things, you get experience and you level up, and that gives you ability points, and you use those ability points to spend to get abilities for your different heroes on your team, your different guardians, I should say. And I like the ability system. It makes your team feel a lot stronger as you get closer together as a team. I did hit the level cap pretty early on, so there wasn't much for me to progress after that, but like that's not that big of a deal. It's more of a narrative game anyway. And there is the other progression system, which is the workbench and the crafting materials section, where you use what you find in the world to craft ability upgrades and that sort of thing. And similarly, I found myself with a bunch of excess materials at the end of the game that I couldn't do anything with because I was good at finding them throughout the earlier levels. And I understand they have to give you an excess amount of these so that most players are of equal strength when they reach the end of the game, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe it would have been nice to have a bonus for collecting more or something along those lines. I'm not sure. Not to say it's a bad mechanic, I do think it does what it's meant to do, and it is a good thing to have in the video game. It makes me want to explore, and that's really enough for me. The workbenches, again, are kind of a direct parallel to Jedi Fallen Order, which I found very interesting, but Jedi Fallen Order does it much better in my opinion. But that's okay, because Guardians has a better team dynamic, it has a better narrative, it has better characters, it has a lot of things up on that game in my opinion. Let's talk setting. It's space. You're flying around in a ship. Very similar to Jedi Fallen Order. The vibes are very similar. You have these moments where you're talking to your shipmates and you're just flying around in space, and that's very similar in vibe as well. Every new planet is diverse and interesting to look at, and it kept me engaged, and there was no backtracking like Fallen Order has. It was just new planet after new planet. And that's because they are different type of games at the end of the day. The biggest difference in setting between Fallen Order and Guardians of the Galaxy is simply how open world and explorable they are. Guardians does want you to explore, but it doesn't let you explore nearly as much. You are mostly limited to a linear path. And Guardians, of course, I think is much more graphically beautiful as it is a newer video game, but that's no surprise. And very similar to Jedi Fallen Order, where you find chests and stuff, you can find chests in Guardians of the Galaxy that give you outfits. Finally, let's get to the strength of this video game, and that is, of course, the narrative. Now, unfortunately, I can't get into too much detail, otherwise I would totally ruin the experience. I want you to go in blind and play it yourself, because it's really worth it. Or if you're not going to play it and you know that for sure, you could watch my playthrough of it. It's all up on a collection on my Twitch channel. But let's just say that the plot of this game is incredibly emotional. It's incredibly uplifting. It's incredibly engaging and interesting. And every single time that I had to put the game down, I had to force myself away to eat or sleep or whatever it is that I had to do, because I did not want to pull myself out of the world. It was so incredibly immersive. It was so incredibly well done. There were so many twists and turns that I would just never have seen coming in a million years, even with all of my experience with Marvel and the movies and the comic book lore. Just never would have seen it coming. It truly is a unique experience, and you have to play it yourself to understand what I'm saying. The characters in this game, oh my goodness, they're all so fleshed out, and they're all so unique, and they're all so alive. It feels so good to just vibe with the team. Each character has their own collectibles that you can find in the world that will allow you to unlock other conversations with them on the Milano and delve deeper into their personal backstories and their personal lives. And again, like I said earlier, they're constantly talking throughout the game. When they're just walking around with you on the ground, when they're just chilling around on the Milano, there's conversations going. They're real people, and they talk like it, and they act like it. If I had to nitpick something about this, and it's something that all video games kind of falter from, but this one is not unique in this case, during combat there are some classic lines that they will say in multiple situations. Like Gamora basically says that pro ZD, well, that enemy got the point bit every single time she's in combat, and it gets a little stale. There's not too many of those, and they don't ruin my experience, at least personally. And not only does the character's constant talking and lore dumping on you while you're just exploring flesh out their own personal backstories, but it fleshes out the personal backstory of the universe that we're in. You get so many deep cuts to Marvel events that have happened. There's this big looming Chitauri versus Kree war that happened that impacted all of the characters in various ways and is incredibly crucial to the plot, where you actually see none of it during the game. And of course, there's this prequel novel that kind of fleshes out their backstories and the backstory of the world and tells you about how Drax probably killed Thanos. It's incredibly well thought out, and this is just a wonderful cherry on top of the universe that they have created over at Eidos-Montréal. The characters just feel so genuinely alive, and I found myself actively caring for each and every single one of them, and it's a beautiful masterpiece narratively. But don't take my word for it. Go play it yourself, please. It deserves your time, it deserves your effort, it deserves your money. It is a great video game, and I cannot recommend it enough. It is so well done. You will not regret it, unless you're lame. Then you might regret it. Genuinely, the game is so funny and emotional and beautiful, and I genuinely think that the story is really important. It touches on some real-world metaphorical type issues that I think people could use rattling around in their brains. I think it's genuinely awesome. Please go play it. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch another one, click around on my screen here. There's some there. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already. That'd be very much appreciated. I'm trying to be more active in the community, and on Twitter I've been much more active, and on all platforms I'm kind of stepping it up. TikTok's been booming. Discord's kind of getting there. We'll see. I'm trying my best here.